Atheists claim to be scientifically minded and often use the term scientific atheism to describe their ideology. Atheists are known to be militant, called militant atheism. Both terms are associated with Marx, Lenin, and the Soviet communist dictatorships in their violence towards Christianity and the Church. Scientific atheism has been an active process of creating an anti-church. Atheism has been historically, inherently anti-theist. Communists were required to spread the propaganda of atheism. See my previous videos on atheism for more about this. Today's atheists, who deny high and low to have nothing to do with communism, repeat exactly the same propaganda and use the same terms to describe their ideas. They're either ignorant, dishonest, or gaslighting you. How can a group use identical terms and propaganda to totalitarian, genocidal, atheist governments and then claim they're, different? This is Oxford Academic. Atheism and Science. This is an article that discusses scientific atheism. There are those who consider that the domain of science is restricted to some kind of physical world, whereas religion deals with the spiritual. A scientific atheist holds that the domain of science is the physical world, but considers there is no other variety of world and that the spiritual is an illusion generated by a physical brain. The Oxford Handbook of Religion and Science is here discussing scientific atheism and scientific atheists. This is a search for scientific atheist on the Oxford Academic website. Outdoor Atheist Lecture organized by the Moscow House of Scientific Atheism. This is 1963, I believe. The attitude of a scientifically alert atheist. Scientific atheism and the atheist, called Scientific Myth, Science, Religion, and Atheism in Popular Television. The Ticket to the Soviet Soul, Soviet Atheism as Worldview. Of course, atheists decry your idea that atheism is a worldview or an ideology. Sadly, academia thinks otherwise. Let's have a look here. Atheism should be understood as a cultural movement aimed at changing beliefs and advancing the scientific atheist worldview and the effectiveness of Soviet anti-religious propaganda. Was called scientific atheist propaganda. Cosmic Enlightenment, Soviet atheism as science. The science could deal the final blow to religion, and they speak of scientific atheist propaganda. Now, of course, I did mention earlier that Lenin and Marx and Stalin and so on, they all required that the communists would spread the quote-unquote propaganda of atheism. Let's look at this article from Universidad de Navarra, Spanish. They speak of scientific atheism, the reasons for scientific atheism. Scientific atheism considers that throughout history, believers turn to God whenever they are faced with a phenomenon they cannot explain or control. Scientific atheism, and so on and so on. And it says, ultimately, scientific atheism contradicts itself, because if it were true, it would not have to take the trouble to disprove an illusion. So that's a very interesting point, and there's a reason I bring this to your attention, this conclusion, because we're going to find this in another source. The Ticket to the Soviet Soul, Soviet Atheism as a Worldview, and they speak of the clash between the scientific and religious worldviews. Now, of course, atheists, again, will deny that they have a worldview, deny that they have an ideology, yet they will clash with you about your view of the world, as if their ideas have no consequences, no outcomes. This, of course, is ridiculous. Atheism is inconsistent with the scientific method, says prize-winning physicist. This is a fantastic article. I do recommend you read it. It is in Scientific American, and it is by Lee Billings on March 20th, 2019, and it's with Templeton Prize winner, theoretical physicist Marcelo Glaser, recipient of the 2019 Templeton Prize. Now to the main piece. This article is called Forced Secularization in Soviet Russia, Why an Atheistic Monopoly Failed. I will give you the highlights and a link to the article where you can download it. Under communism, the Russian religious landscape consisted mainly of two competitors, a severely repressed Russian Orthodox Church and a heavily promoted atheist alternative to religion called scientific atheism. Now, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and others claim to be scientific atheists to promote scientific atheism, just like Marx, Lenin, Mao, Pol Pot, Stalin. How are they different if they are promoting exactly the same thing? If you are promoting scientific atheism and you are using exactly the same anti-Christian, anti-church, anti-religious propaganda that Mao did, that Lenin did, that Stalin did, if you're quoting exactly the same propaganda, how are you different to Mao, to Lenin, to Stalin, even to Hitler? Because you're mouthing the very same propaganda. Under these circumstances, one might expect a rapid spread of religious disbelief, but the intensity of atheist campaign originated from official mandate and not popular appeal. In turn, scientific atheism never inspired the Russian population and grew increasingly uninspired as Soviet officials created a monopoly church of scientific atheism in hopes of replacing persistent religious beliefs and practices. Atheists waged a 70-year war on religious belief in the Soviet Union. The Communist Party destroyed churches, mosques, and temples. It executed religious leaders. It flooded the schools and media with anti-religious propaganda, which is exactly what the atheist movement is doing today. It is flooding schools, universities, and media with anti-religious propaganda with its doctrine of atheism. It introduced a belief system called scientific atheism. As many observers of the Soviet Union noted, convinced communists demonstrated a conviction to their doctrine that was remarkably similar to religious faith. See Berdyaev, 1931, 1966, Berlin, 1966, Kariainen, 1989, McDaniel, 96, Zehrer, 1986. Scientific atheism, the official term for the Communist Party's philosophical worldview, posited the ultimate purpose of human existence, a moral code of conduct, and created a collection of atheistic rituals and ceremonies that mimicked religious ones. Now, you might start to see parallels with modern atheists. You know they have a philosophical worldview. You know they posit the ultimate purpose of human existence, and they believe they have a moral code of conduct. Soviet officials heavily promoted scientific atheism. The doctrine was taught in schools, advocated in the media, and emphatically propagandized. In lieu of church participation, of course, the atheists created their own organizations. One of them was the League of Militant Atheists. I've heard of militant atheists before. Maybe Richard Dawkins can tell us more about militant atheists and militant atheism. I believe he's called for that. The League of Militant Atheists were violent. They were active prior to World War II and later replaced by the Knowledge Society. Fascinating. Let's have a look at that. This is Quran 16:43. And we did not send before you except men towards whom we sent divine revelation. So people, ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. Might be a slight religious overtone there, certain totalitarian religious overtone, but you never know. The Knowledge Society, they might be Gnostics. They might be know-it-alls. They might think they know better. But I'll let you decide. All in all, scientific atheism was omnipresent in the daily lives of communist citizens. Atheist propaganda and rituals in combination with the brutal repression of Russian religious groups produced an atheistic church similar to a state-supported religious monopoly. Scientific atheism lacked plausibility due to the recruitment tactics employed by the Soviet government and inconsistencies in the doctrine itself. Which is why earlier I raised this article. Ultimately, scientific atheism contradicts itself because if it were true, it would not have to take the trouble to disprove an illusion. This is in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion. Please ask atheists why they adopted the very same titles that were used by repressive, violent, genocidal, totalitarian communists, some of the worst people in history, while they deny that they have any connection whatsoever to these groups, yet they've A, borrowed the titles, B, borrowed the propaganda. Something to think about. Till next time.